The origins of Buddhism. Chinese civilization was at least 2,000 years old when it first encountered Buddhism. Thus the new philosophy entered into a solidly established culture in which it could hardly become acceptable without major adaptations to the Chinese mentality, even though there were some resemblance between Taoism and Buddhism so strong that they have aroused speculation as to whether contacts between the two were much earlier than has been supposed. China absorbed Buddhism as it has absorbed so many other external influences, not only philosophies and ideas, but also alien populations and invaders. Undoubtedly, this is due in some measure to the extraordinary stability and maturity which the Chinese have derived from Confucianism. Reasonable, unfanatical, humanistic Confucianism is one of the most workable patterns of social convention that the world has known. Coupled with the let well enough alone attitude of Taoism, it nurtured a mellow and rather easygoing type of mentality, which, when it absorbed Buddhism, did much to make it more practical. That is to say, it made Buddhism a possible way of life for human beings, for people with families, with everyday work to do, and with normal instincts and passions. It was a basic Confucian principle that it is man who makes truth great, not truth which makes man great. For this reason, humanness, or human-heartedness, Ren, was always felt to be superior to righteousness, Yi, since man himself is greater than any idea which he may invent. There are times when men's passions are much more trustworthy than their principles. Since opposed principles or ideologies are irreconcilable, wars fought over principle will be wars of mutual annihilation. But wars fought for simple greed will be far less destructive, because the aggressor will be careful not to destroy what he is fighting to capture. Reasonable, that is, human men, will always be capable of compromise. But men who have dehumanized themselves by becoming the blind worshippers of an idea or an ideal are fanatics, whose devotion to abstractions makes them the enemies of life. Modified by such attitudes, Far Eastern Buddhism is much more palatable and according to nature than its Indian and Tibetan counterparts, with ideals of life which seem at times to be superhuman, more suited to angels than to men. Even so, all forms of Buddhism subscribe to the middle way between the extremes of angel, deva, and demon, preta, ascetic and sensualist, and claim that supreme awakening, or Buddhahood, can be attained only from the human state. There are some serious difficulties in the way of giving an historically accurate account of Indian Buddhism, as of the whole philosophical tradition from which it arose. No student of Asian thought should be unaware of these difficulties, because they make it necessary to take almost every important pronouncement about ancient Indian thought with caution. Thus, before attempting to describe Indian Buddhism, some of these difficulties should be mentioned. The first, and most serious, is the problem of interpreting the Sanskrit and Pali texts in which ancient Indian literature is preserved. This is especially true of Sanskrit, the sacred language of India, and more particularly the form of Sanskrit used in the Vedic period. Both Western and Indian scholars are uncertain as to its exact interpretation, and all modern dictionaries rely heavily on a single source, the lexicon compiled by Boetlink and Roth in the latter part of the last century, and now admitted to contain a great deal of guesswork. This seriously affects our understanding of the primary sources of Hinduism, the Vedas and Upanishads. The discovery of proper European equivalents for philosophical terms has been hindered by the fact that early lexicographers were all too ready to find correspondence with Western theological terms, since one of the primary objects of their studies was to assist the missionaries. The second is that it is extremely hard to know what was the original form of Buddhism. There are two sets of Buddhist scriptures, the Pali canon of the Theravada or Southern school of Buddhism, which flourishes in Ceylon, Burma, and Thailand, and the Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese canon of the Mahayana or Northern school. There is a general consensus of scholars that the Pali canon is, on the whole, the earlier of the two, and that the principal sutras, as the sacred texts are called, of the Mahayana canon were all compiled after 100 BC. However, the literary form of the Pali canon does not suggest that it represents the actual words of Gautama the Buddha. If the Upanishads are characteristic of the style of discourse of an Indian teacher between 800 and 300 BC, they bear little resemblance to the tediously repetitious and scholastic style of most Buddhist scriptures. There can be little doubt that the greater part of both Buddhist canons is the work of the Pandits of the Sangha, the Buddhist monastic order, for it shows every sign of being the reverential elaboration of an original doctrine. As with Russian icons, the original painting has been almost lost to sight in the overlay of jewels and gold. The third is that the Hindu-Buddhist tradition has never had the historical sense of the Hebrew-Christian tradition, so that there are few, if any, marks to indicate the date of a given text. Scriptures were handed down by oral tradition for an interminable period of time before being committed to writing, and it is quite possible that historical references could have been changed to suit the times as the oral form was handed down. Furthermore, a Buddhist monk writing in AD 200 would have no compunction in attributing his own words to the Buddha if he felt sincerely that they were an expression not of personal opinion, but of the supra-personal state of awakening to which he had attained. He would attribute the words to the Buddha as speaking in a spiritual rather than material body. The danger of scholarship is always that, in extreme specialization, it may be unable to see the forest for the trees. But the problem of gaining some idea of the thought of India at the time of the Buddha, 6 centuries before Christ, is not to be solved by careful piecework alone, necessary as this may be. There is, however, enough reliable information to suggest the grand and beautifully ordered form of Upanishadic Hinduism if we do not read it with our noses against the page. Fundamental to the life and thought of India from the very earliest times is the great mythological theme of Atma Yajna, the act of self-sacrifice, whereby God gives birth to the world, and whereby men, following the divine pattern, reintegrate themselves with God. The act by which the world is created is the same act by which it is consummated, the giving up of one's life, as if the whole process of the universe were the type of game in which it is necessary to pass on the ball as soon as it is received. Thus, the basic myth of Hinduism is that the world is God playing hide-and-seek with himself. As Prajapati, Vishnu, or Brahma, the Lord, under many names, creates the world by an act of self-dismemberment, or self-forgetting, whereby the one becomes many, and the single actor plays innumerable parts. In the end, he comes again to himself, only to begin the play once more, the one dying into the many, and the many dying into the one. 1,000 heads hath Purusha, 1,000 eyes, 1,000 feet. On every side pervading earth, he fills a space 10 fingers wide. This Purusha is all that yet hath been, and all that is to be, the Lord of immortality, that waxes greater still by food. So mighty is his greatness, yea, greater than this is Purusha. All creatures are 1/4 of him, 3/4 eternal life in heaven. When the gods prepared the sacrifice with Purusha as their offering, its oil was spring, the holy gift was autumn, summer was the wood. From that great general sacrifice the dripping fat was gathered up. He formed the creatures of the air, and animals both wild and tame. When they divided Purusha, how many portions did they make? What did they call his mouth, his arms? What did they call his thighs and feet? The Brahman caste was his mouth. Of both his arms was the Rajanya, Kshatriya caste made. His thighs became Vaishya. From his feet the Shudra was produced. The moon was gendered from his mind, and from his eye the sun had birth. Indra and Agni from his mouth were born, and Vayu from his breath. Forth from his navel came mid-air. The sky was fashioned from his head, earth from his feet, and from his ear, the regions. Thus they formed the worlds. The 1,000 heads, eyes, and feet of the Purusha are the members of men and other beings. For the point is that that which knows in and through every individual is God himself, the Atman, or self of the world. Every life is a part or role in which the mind of God is absorbed, somewhat as an actor absorbs himself in being Hamlet, and forgets that in real life he is Mr. Smith. By the act of self-abandonment, God becomes all beings, yet at the same time does not cease to be God. All creatures are 1/4 of him, 3/4 eternal life in heaven. For God is divided in play, in make-believe, but remains undivided in reality, so that when the play comes to an end, the individualized consciousness awakes to find itself divine. In the beginning this world was Atman, the self, alone in the form of Purusha. Looking about, he saw nothing other than himself. He said first, I am. Thence came the word, I. Thus, even now, when one is spoken to, he first answers simply, it is I, and then tells whatever name he has. On all sides that has hands and feet, on all sides eyes, heads, and faces, on all sides in the world it hears. All things it embraces. It is important to remember that this picture of the world as the play, Lila, of God, is mythological in form. If, at this stage, we were to translate it directly into philosophical statement, it would be a crude type of pantheism, with which Hindu philosophy is generally and erroneously confused. Thus the idea of each man, each thing, as a part which the Purusha plays in the state of self-forgetting, must not be confused with a logical or scientific statement of fact. The form of statement is poetic, not logical. In the words of the Mundaka Upanishad, truly this Atman, self, the poets say, travels on this earth from body to body. Hindu philosophy has not made the mistake of imagining that one can make an informative, factual, and positive statement about the ultimate reality. As the same Upanishad says, where knowledge is without duality, without action, cause or effect, unspeakable, incomparable, beyond description, what is that? It is impossible to say. Every positive statement about ultimate things must be made in the suggestive form of myth, of poetry. For in this realm, the direct and indicative form of speech can say only neti neti, no, no, since what can be described and categorized must always belong to the conventional realm. Hindu mythology elaborates the theme of the divine play on a fabulous scale, embracing not only colossal concepts of time and space, but also the widest extremes of pleasure and pain, virtue and depravity. The inmost self of saint and sage is no less the veiled Godhead than the inmost self of the debauchee, the coward, the lunatic, and the very demons. The opposites, dvandva, of light and darkness, good and evil, pleasure and pain, are the essential elements of the game. For although the Godhead is identified with truth, Sat, consciousness, Chit, and bliss, Ananda, the dark side of life has its integral part in the game, just as every drama must have its villain, to disrupt the status quo, and as the cards must be shuffled, thrown into chaos, in order that there may be a significant development of the play. For Hindu thought, there is no problem of evil. The conventional, relative world is necessarily a world of opposites. Light is inconceivable apart from darkness. Order is meaningless without disorder. And likewise, up without down, sound without silence, pleasure without pain. In the words of Ananda Kumaraswamy, for anyone who holds that God made the world, the question, why did he permit the existence in it of any evil, or of that evil one in whom all evil is personified, is altogether meaningless. One might as well inquire why he did not make a world without dimensions, or one without temporal succession. According to the myth, the divine play goes on through endless cycles of time, through periods of manifestation and withdrawal of the worlds measured in units of kalpas, the kalpa being a span of 4,320,000,000 years. From the human standpoint, such a conception presents a terrifying monotony, since it goes on aimlessly, forever and ever. But from the divine standpoint, it has all the fascination of the repetitious games of children, which go on, because time has been forgotten, and has reduced itself to a single, wondrous instant. The foregoing myth is not the expression of a formal philosophy, but of an experience or state of consciousness which is called moksha, or liberation. On the whole, it is safer to say that Indian philosophy is primarily this experience. It is only quite secondarily a system of ideas which attempt to translate the experience into conventional language. At root, then, the philosophy becomes intelligible only by sharing the experience, which consists of the same type of non-conventional knowledge found in Taoism. It is also termed Atma-jnana, self-knowledge, or Atma-Buddha, self-awakening, since it may be considered as the discovery of who or what I am when I am no longer identified with any role or conventional definition of the person. Indian philosophy does not describe the content of this discovery, except in mythological terms, using the phrase I am Brahman, Aham Brahman, or that art thou, Tattvam Asi, to suggest that self-knowledge is a realization of one's original identity with God. But this does not imply what claiming to be God means in a Hebrew-Christian context, where mythical language is ordinarily confused with factual language, so that there is no clear distinction between God as described in the terms of conventional thought and God as he is in reality. A Hindu does not say, I am Brahman, with the implication that he is, personally, in charge of the whole universe and informed as to every detail of its operation. On the one hand, he is not speaking of identity with God at the level of his superficial personality. On the other, his God, Brahman, is not in charge of the universe in a personal way. He does not know and act in the manner of a person, since he does not know the universe in terms of conventional facts, nor act upon it by means of deliberation, effort, and will. It may be of significance that the word Brahman is from the root bri, to grow, since his creative activity, like that of the Tao, is with the spontaneity proper to growth, as distinct from the deliberation proper to making. Furthermore, though Brahman is said to know himself, this knowing is not a matter of information, a knowledge such as one has of objects distinct from a subject. In the words of Shankara, for he is the knower, and the knower can know other things, but cannot make himself the object of his own knowledge, in the same way that fire can burn other things, but cannot burn itself. To the Western mind, the puzzle of Indian philosophy is that it has so much to say about what the moksha experience is not, and little or nothing to say about what it is. This is naturally bewildering, for if the experience is really without content, or if it is so lacking in relation to the things which we consider important, how is one to explain the immense esteem which it holds in the Indian scheme of life? Even at the conventional level, it is surely easy to see that knowing what is not so is often quite as important as knowing what is. Even when medicine can suggest no effective remedy for the common cold, there is some advantage in knowing the uselessness of certain popular nostrums. Furthermore, the function of negative knowledge is not unlike the uses of space, the empty page upon which words can be written, the empty jar into which liquid can be poured, the empty window through which light can be admitted, and the empty pipe through which water can flow. Obviously, the value of emptiness lies in the movements it permits, or in the substance which it mediates and contains. But the emptiness must come first. This is why Indian philosophy concentrates on negation, on liberating the mind from the concepts of truth. It proposes no idea, no description of what is to fill the mind's void, because the idea would exclude the fact, somewhat as a picture of the sun on the window pane would shut out the true sun's light. Whereas the Hebrews would not permit an image of God in wood or stone, the Hindus will not permit an image of thought, unless it be so obviously mythological as not to be mistaken for the reality. Therefore, the practical discipline, sadhana, of the way of liberation is a progressive disentanglement of one's self, Atman, from every identification. It is to realize that I am not this body, these sensations, these feelings, these thoughts, this consciousness. The basic reality of my life is not any conceivable object. Ultimately, it is not even to be identified with any idea, as of God or Atman. In the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, it is that which is conscious neither of the subjective nor of the objective, nor of both, which is neither simple consciousness, nor undifferentiated sentience, nor mere darkness. It is unseen, without relations, incomprehensible, uninferable, and indescribable, the essence of self-consciousness, the ending of Maya. The Atman is to our total consciousness what the head is to the sense of sight, neither light nor darkness, neither full nor empty, only an inconceivable beyond. In the moment when every last identification of the self with some object or concept has ceased, in the state called nirvikalpa, or without conception, there flashes forth from its unknown depths the state of consciousness which is called divine, the knowledge of Brahman. Translated into conventional and, let it be repeated, mythopoetic language, the knowledge of Brahman is represented as the discovery that this world, which seemed to be many, is in truth one, that all is Brahman, and that all duality is falsely imagined. Taken as statements of fact, such utterances are logically meaningless and convey no information. Yet they seem to be the best possible expression in words of the experience itself, though it is as if in the moment of saying the last word the tongue were paralyzed by its own revelation and compelled to babble nonsense or be silent. Moksha is also understood as liberation from Maya, one of the most important words in Indian philosophy, both Hindu and Buddhist. For the manifold world of facts and events is said to be Maya, ordinarily understood as an illusion, which veils the one underlying reality of Brahman. This gives the impression that moksha is a state of consciousness in which the whole varied world of nature vanishes from sight, merged in a boundless ocean of vaguely luminous space. Such an impression should be dismissed at once, for it implies a duality, an incompatibility between Brahman and Maya, which is against the whole principle of Upanishadic philosophy. For Brahman is not one as opposed to many, not simple as opposed to complex. Brahman is without duality, Advaita, which is to say without any opposite, since Brahman is not in any class or, for that matter, outside any class. Now, classification is precisely Maya. The word is derived from the Sanskrit root matar, to measure, form, build, or lay out a plan, the root from which we obtain such Greco-Latin words as meter, matrix, material, and matter. The fundamental process of measurement is division, whether by drawing a line with the finger, by marking off or enclosing circles with the span of the hand or dividers, or by sorting grain or liquids into measures, cups. Thus, the Sanskrit root dva, from which we get the word divide, is also the root of the Latin duo, two, and the English dual. To say, then, that the world of facts and events is Maya, is to say that facts and events are terms of measurement rather than realities of nature. We must, however, expand the concept of measurement to include setting bounds of all kinds, whether by descriptive classification or selective screening. It will thus be easy to see that facts and events are as abstract as lines of latitude or as feet and inches. Consider for a moment that it is impossible to isolate a single fact, all by itself. Facts come in pairs at the very least, for a single body is inconceivable apart from a space in which it hangs. Definition, setting bounds, delineation, these are always acts of division, and thus of duality, for as soon as a boundary is defined, it has two sides. This point of view is somewhat startling, and even quite hard to understand, for those long accustomed to think that things, facts, and events are the very building blocks of the world, the most solid of solid realities. Yet a proper understanding of the Maya doctrine is one of the most essential prerequisites for the study of Hinduism and Buddhism, and in trying to grasp its meaning, one must try to put aside the various idealist philosophies of the West, with which it is so often confused, even by modern Indian Vedantists. For the world is not an illusion of the mind, in the sense that, to the eyes of the liberated man, Jivan Mukta, there is nothing to be seen but a trackless void. He sees the world that we see, but he does not mark it off, measure it, divide it in the same way. He does not look upon it as really or concretely broken down into separate things and events. He sees that the skin may just as well be regarded as what joins us to our environment as what separates us from it. He sees, furthermore, that the skin will be considered as joining only if it has first been considered as separating, or vice versa. Thus, his point of view is not monistic. He does not think that all things are in reality one, because concretely speaking, there never were any things to be considered one. To join is as much Maya as to separate. For this reason, both Hindus and Buddhists prefer to speak of reality as non-dual rather than one, since the concept of one must always be in relation to that of many. The doctrine of Maya is therefore a doctrine of relativity. It is saying that things, facts, and events are delineated not by nature, but by human description, and that the way in which we describe or divide them is relative to our varying points of view. It is easy to see, for example, that an event called the First World War can only rather arbitrarily be said to have begun on August 4th, 1914, and to have ended on November 11th, 1918. Historians can discover actual beginnings of the war long before, and resumptions of the same strife long after these formal boundaries of the event. For events can divide and merge like blobs of mercury, according to the changing fashions of historical description. The boundaries of events are conventional rather than natural, in the sense that a man's life is said to have begun at the moment of parturition, rather than at conception on the one hand, or weaning on the other. Similarly, it is easy to see the conventional character of things. Ordinarily, a human organism is counted as one thing, though from the physiological standpoint it is as many things as it has parts or organs, and from the sociological standpoint it is merely part of a larger thing called a group. Certainly, the world of nature abounds with surfaces and lines, with areas of density and vacuity, which we employ in marking out the boundaries of events and things. But here again, the Maya doctrine asserts that these forms, rupa, have no own being, or self-nature, svabhava. They do not exist in their own right, but only in relation to one another, as a solid cannot be distinguished save in relation to a space. In this sense, the solid and the space, the sound and the silence, the existent and the non-existent, the figure and the ground, are inseparable, interdependent, or mutually arising, and it is only by Maya, or conventional division, that they may be considered apart from one another. Indian philosophy also thinks of rupa, or form, as Maya, because it is impermanent. Indeed, when Hindu and Buddhist texts speak of the empty or illusory character of the visible world of nature, as distinct from the conventional world of things, they refer precisely to the impermanence of its forms. Form is flux, and thus Maya, in the slightly extended sense that it cannot be firmly marked down or grasped. Form is Maya when the mind attempts to comprehend and control it in the fixed categories of thought, that is, by means of names, nama, and words. For these are precisely the nouns and verbs by means of which the abstract and conceptual categories of things and events are designated. To serve their purpose, names and terms must of necessity be fixed and definite like all other units of measurement. But their use is, up to a point, so satisfactory that man is always in danger of confusing his measures with the world so measured, of identifying money with wealth, fixed convention with fluid reality. But to the degree that he identifies himself and his life with these rigid and hollow frames of definition, he condemns himself to the perpetual frustration of one trying to catch water in a sieve. Thus Indian philosophy speaks constantly of the unwisdom of pursuing things, of striving for the permanence of particular entities and events, because it sees in all this nothing more than an infatuation with ghosts, with the abstract measures of the mind, manas. Maya is, then, usually equated with nama-rupa, or name and form, with the mind's attempt to grasp the fluid forms of nature in its mesh of fixed classes. But when it is understood that form is ultimately void, in the special sense of ungraspable and immeasurable, the world of form is immediately seen as Brahman rather than Maya. The formal world becomes the real world in the moment when it is no longer clutched, in the moment when its changeful fluidity is no longer resisted. Hence it is the very transitoriness of the world which is the sign of its divinity, of its actual identity, with the invisible and immeasurable infinity of Brahman. This is why the Hindu-Buddhist insistence on the impermanence of the world is not the pessimistic and nihilistic doctrine which Western critics normally suppose it to be. Transitoriness is depressing only to the mind which insists upon trying to grasp, but to the mind which lets go and moves with the flow of change, which becomes, in Zen Buddhist imagery, like a ball in a mountain stream, the sense of transience or emptiness becomes a kind of ecstasy. This is perhaps why, in both East and West, impermanence is so often the theme of the most profound and moving poetry. So much so that the splendor of change shines through even when the poet seems to resent it the most. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Stated thus, as R.H. Blyth observes, it seems not so bad after all. In sum, then, the Maya doctrine points out, firstly, the impossibility of grasping the actual world in the mind's net of words and concepts, and secondly, the fluid character of those very forms which thought attempts to define. The world of facts and events is altogether nama, abstract names, and rupa, fluid form. It escapes both the comprehension of the philosopher and the grasp of the pleasure-seeker, like water from a clutching fist. There is even something deceptive in the idea of Brahman as the eternal reality underlying the flux, and of the Atman as the divine ground of human consciousness. For insofar as these are concepts, they are as incapable of grasping the real as any other. It is precisely this realization of the total elusiveness of the world which lies at the root of Buddhism. This is the special shift of emphasis, which more than anything else distinguishes the doctrine of the Buddha from the teaching of the Upanishads, which is the raison d'etre for the growth of Buddhism as a distinct movement in Indian life and thought. For Gautama, the awakened one, or Buddha, died circa 545 BC, lived at a time when the major Upanishads were already in existence, and their philosophy must be seen as the point of departure for his own teaching. It would be a serious mistake, however, to look upon the Buddha as the founder or reformer of a religion which came into being as some kind of organized revolt against Hinduism. For we are speaking of a time when there was no consciousness of religions, when such terms as Hinduism or Brahmanism would have meant nothing. There was simply a tradition, embodied in the orally transmitted doctrine of the Vedas and Upanishads, a tradition that was not specifically religious in that it involved a whole way of life, and concerned everything from the methods of agriculture to the knowledge of the ultimate reality. The Buddha was acting in full accord with this tradition when he became a rishi, or forest sage, who had abandoned the life of the householder and divested himself of caste in order to follow a way of liberation. As with every other rishi, the method of his way of liberation had certain characteristic features, and his doctrine contained criticisms of men's failure to practice the tradition which they professed. Furthermore, he was being entirely traditional in his abandonment of caste, and in accepting a following of casteless and homeless students. For the Indian tradition, even more than the Chinese, specifically encourages the abandonment of the conventional life at a certain age, after the duties of family and citizenship have been fulfilled. Relinquishment of caste is the outward and visible sign of the realization that one's true state is unclassified, that one's role or person is simply conventional, and that one's true nature is no thing and no body. This realization was the crux of the Buddha's experience of awakening, Bodhi, which dawned upon him one night as he sat under the celebrated Bo tree at Gaya after 7 years of meditation in the forests. From the standpoint of Zen, this experience is the essential content of Buddhism, and the verbal doctrine is quite secondary to the wordless transmission of the experience itself from generation to generation. For 7 years, Gautama had struggled by the traditional means of yoga and tapas, contemplation and ascesis, to penetrate the cause of man's enslavement to Maya, to find release from the vicious circle of clinging to life, Trishna, which is like trying to make the hand grasp itself. All his efforts had been in vain. The eternal Atman, the real self, was not to be found. However much he concentrated upon his own mind to find its root and ground, he found only his own effort to concentrate. The evening before his awakening, he simply gave up, relaxed his ascetic diet, and ate some nourishing food. Thereupon he felt at once that a profound change was coming over him. He sat beneath the tree, vowing never to rise until he had attained the supreme awakening, and according to a tradition, sat all through the night until the first glimpse of the morning star suddenly provoked a state of perfect clarity and understanding. This was Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, unexcelled, complete awakening, liberation from Maya, and from the everlasting round of birth and death, samsara, which goes on and on for as long as a man tries in any way whatsoever to grasp at his own life. Yet the actual content of this experience was never and could never be put into words, for words are the frames of Maya, the meshes of its net, and the experience is of the water which slips through. Thus, so far as words are concerned, the most that may be said of this experience are the words attributed to the Buddha in the Vajrachedika. Just so, Subhuti, I obtained not the least thing from unexcelled complete awakening, and for this very reason it is called unexcelled complete awakening. Thus, from the standpoint of Zen, the Buddha never said a word, despite the volumes of scriptures attributed to him, for his real message remained always unspoken, and was such that when words attempted to express it, they made it seem as if it were nothing at all. Yet it is the essential tradition of Zen that what cannot be conveyed by speech can nevertheless be passed on by direct pointing, by some nonverbal means of communication without which the Buddhist experience could never have been handed down to future generations. In its own, probably rather late tradition, Zen maintains that the Buddha transmitted awakening to his chief disciple, Mahakasyapa, by holding up a flower and remaining silent. The Pali canon, however, relates that immediately after his awakening, the Buddha went to the deer park at Benares and set forth his doctrine to those who had formerly been his companions in the ascetic life. expressing it in the form of those Four Noble Truths which provide so convenient a summary of Buddhism. These four truths are patterned on the traditional Vedic form of a physician's diagnosis and prescription, the identification of the disease and of its cause, the pronouncement as to whether it may be cured, and the prescription for the remedy. The first truth is concerned with the problematic word dukkha, loosely translatable as suffering, and which designates the great disease of the world for which the Buddha's method, Dharma, is the cure. Birth is dukkha, decay is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha. So also are sorrow and grief. To be bound with things which we dislike, and to be parted from things which we like, these also are dukkha. Not to get what one desires, this also is dukkha. In a word, this body, this fivefold aggregation based on clutching, trishna, this is dukkha. This, however, cannot be compressed into the sweeping assertion that life is suffering. The point is rather that life, as we usually live it, is suffering, or, more exactly, is bedeviled by the peculiar frustration which comes from attempting the impossible. Perhaps, then, frustration is the best equivalent for dukkha, even though the word is the simple antonym of sukha, which means pleasant or sweet. In another formulation of the Buddhist teaching, dukkha is one of the three characteristics of being, or becoming, bhava, whereof the other two are Anitya, impermanence, and Anatman, absence of any self. These two terms are of basic importance. The Anitya doctrine is again not quite the simple assertion that the world is impermanent, but rather that the more one grasps at the world, the more it changes. Reality in itself is neither permanent nor impermanent. It cannot be categorized. But when one tries to hold on to it, change is everywhere apparent, since, like one's own shadow, the more one pursues it, the faster it flees. In the same way, the Anatman doctrine is not quite the bald assertion that there is no real self, Atman, at the basis of our consciousness. The point is rather that there is no self, or basic reality, which may be grasped, either by direct experience or by concepts. Apparently the Buddha felt that the doctrine of the Atman in the Upanishads lent itself too easily to a fatal misinterpretation. It became an object of belief, a desideratum, a goal to be reached, something to which the mind could cling as its one final abode of safety in the flux of life. The Buddha's view was that a self so grasped was no longer the true self, but only one more of the innumerable forms of Maya. Thus, Anatman might be expressed in the form, the true self is non-self, since any attempt to conceive the self, believe in the self, or seek for the self, immediately thrusts it away. The Upanishads distinguish between Atman, the true supra-individual self, and the Jivatman, or individual soul, and the Buddha's Anatman doctrine agrees with them in denying the reality of the latter. It is fundamental to every school of Buddhism that there is no ego, no enduring entity which is the constant subject of our changing experiences. For the ego exists in an abstract sense alone, being an abstraction from memory, somewhat like the illusory circle of fire made by a whirling torch. We can, for example, imagine the path of a bird through the sky as a distinct line which it has taken, but this line is as abstract as a line of latitude. In concrete reality, the bird left no line, and similarly, the past from which our ego is abstracted has entirely disappeared. Thus, any attempt to cling to the ego, or to make it an effective source of action, is doomed to frustration. The second noble truth relates to the cause of frustration, which is said to be trishna, clinging or grasping, based on avidya, which is ignorance or unconsciousness. Now, avidya is the formal opposite of awakening. It is the state of mind when hypnotized or spellbound by Maya, so that it mistakes the abstract world of things and events for the concrete world of reality. At a still deeper level, it is lack of self-knowledge, lack of the realization that all grasping turns out to be the futile effort to grasp oneself, or rather, to make life catch hold of itself. For to one who has self-knowledge, there is no duality between himself and the external world. Avidya is ignoring the fact that subject and object are relational, like the two sides of a coin, so that when one pursues, the other retreats. This is why the egocentric attempt to dominate the world, to bring as much of the world as possible under the control of the ego, has only to proceed for a little while before it raises the difficulty of the ego's controlling itself. This is really a simple problem of what we now call cybernetics, the science of control. Mechanically and logically, it is easy to see that any system approaching perfect self-control is also approaching perfect self-frustration. Such a system is a vicious circle, and has the same logical structure as a statement which states something about itself. For example, I am lying, when it is implied that the statement is itself a lie. The statement circulates fatuously forever, since it is always true to the extent that it is false, and false to the extent that it is true. Expressed more concretely, I cannot throw a ball so long as I am holding on to it, so as to maintain perfect control of its movement. Thus the desire for perfect control of the environment and of oneself is based on a profound mistrust of the controller. Avidya is the failure to see the basic self-contradiction of this position. From it, therefore, arises a futile grasping or controlling of life, which is pure self-frustration. And the pattern of life which follows is the vicious circle, which in Hinduism and Buddhism is called samsara, the round of birth and death. The active principle of the round is known as karma, or conditioned action. Action, that is, arising from a motive and seeking a result. The type of action which always requires the necessity for further action. Man is involved in karma when he interferes with the world in such a way that he is compelled to go on interfering, when the solution of a problem creates still more problems to be solved, when the control of one thing creates the need to control several others. Karma is thus the fate of everyone who tries to be God. He lays a trap for the world in which he himself gets caught. Many Buddhists understand the round of birth and death quite literally as a process of reincarnation, wherein the karma, which shapes the individual, does so again and again in life after life, until, through insight and awakening, it is laid to rest. But in Zen, and in other schools of the Mahayana, it is often taken in a more figurative way, as that the process of rebirth is from moment to moment, so that one is being reborn so long as one identifies himself with a continuing ego, which reincarnates itself afresh at each moment of time. Thus, the validity and interest of the doctrine does not require acceptance of a special theory of survival. Its importance is rather that it exemplifies the whole problem of action in vicious circles and its resolution. And in this respect, Buddhist philosophy should have a special interest for students of communication theory, cybernetics, logical philosophy, and similar matters. The third noble truth is concerned with the ending of self-frustration, of grasping, and of the whole viciously circular pattern of karma, which generates the round. The ending is called nirvana, a word of such dubious etymology that a simple translation is exceedingly difficult. It has been variously connected with Sanskrit roots, which would make it mean the blowing out of a flame, or simply blowing out, ex or despiration, or with the cessation of waves, turnings, or circlings, vritti, of the mind. The two latter interpretations seem, on the whole, to make the most sense. If nirvana is despiration, it is the act of one who has seen the futility of trying to hold his breath, or life, prana, indefinitely, since to hold the breath is to lose it. Thus, nirvana is the equivalent of moksha, release, or liberation. Seen from one side, it appears to be despair, the recognition that life utterly defeats our efforts to control it, that all human striving is no more than a vanishing hand clutching at clouds. Seen from the other side, this despair bursts into joy and creative power, on the principle that to lose one's life is to find it, to find freedom of action, unimpeded by self-frustration and the anxiety inherent in trying to save and control the self. If nirvana is related to the cessation, of turnings, vritti, the term is synonymous with the aim of yoga, defined in the Yoga Sutra as chitta vritti nirodha, the cessation of turnings of the mind. These turnings are the thoughts whereby the mind endeavors to grasp the world and itself. Yoga is the practice of trying to stop these thoughts by thinking about them until the utter futility of the process is felt so vividly that it simply drops away, and the mind discovers its natural and unconfused state. It is obvious, however, that both etymologies give us the same essential meaning. Nirvana is the way of life which ensues when clutching at life has come to an end. Insofar as all definition is clutching, nirvana is necessarily indefinable. It is the natural, unself-grasped state of the mind. And here, of course, the mind has no specific meaning, for what is not grasped is not known in the conventional sense of knowledge. More popularly and literally understood, nirvana is the disappearance of the being from the round of incarnations, not into the state of annihilation, but simply into a state escaping definition, and thus immeasurable and infinite. To attain nirvana is also to attain Buddhahood, awakening. But this is not attainment in any ordinary sense, because no acquisition and no motivation are involved. It is impossible to desire nirvana, or to intend to reach it, for anything desirable or conceivable as an object of action is, by definition, not nirvana. Nirvana can only arise unintentionally, spontaneously, when the impossibility of self-grasping has been thoroughly perceived. A Buddha, therefore, is a man of no rank. He is not above, like an angel. He is not below, like a demon. He does not appear anywhere in the 6 divisions of the round, and it would be mistaken to think of him as superior to the angels, for the law of the round is that what goes up must come down, and vice versa. He has transcended all dualities whatsoever, and thus it would mean nothing to him to think of himself as a superior person or a spiritual success. The 4th noble truth describes the Eightfold path of the Buddha's Dharma, that is, the method or doctrine whereby self-frustration is brought to an end. Each section of the path has a name preceded by the word samyak, Pali sama, which has the meaning of perfect or complete. The first 2 sections have to do with thought, the following 4 have to do with action, and the final 2 have to do with contemplation or awareness. We therefore have 1. Samyak drishti, or complete view, 2. Samyak samkalpa, or complete understanding, 3. Samyak vak, or complete, that is, truthful speech, 4. Samyak karmanta, or complete action, 5. Samyak ajiva, or complete vocation, 6. Samyak vyayama, or complete application, 7. Samyak smriti, or complete recollectedness, 8. Samyak samadhi, or complete contemplation. Without discussing these sections in detail, it may simply be said that the first 2 are concerned with a proper understanding of the doctrine and of the human situation. In some ways, the first section, complete view, contains all the others, since the method of Buddhism is above all the practice of clear awareness, of seeing the world, yata bhutam, just as it is. Such awareness is a lively attention to one's direct experience, to the world as immediately sensed, so as not to be misled by names and labels. Samyak samadhi, the last section of the path, is the perfection of the first, signifying pure experience, pure awareness, wherein there is no longer the dualism of the knower and the known. The sections dealing with action are often misunderstood because they have a deceptive similarity to a system of morals. Buddhism does not share the Western view that there is a moral law, enjoined by God or by nature, which it is man's duty to obey. The Buddha's precepts of conduct, abstinence from taking life, taking what is not given, exploitation of the passions, lying, and intoxication, are voluntarily assumed rules of expediency, the intent of which is to remove the hindrances to clarity of awareness. Failure to observe the precepts produces bad karma, not because karma is a law or moral retribution, but because all motivated and purposeful actions, whether conventionally good or bad, are karma, insofar as they are directed to the grasping of life. Generally speaking, the conventionally bad actions are rather more grasping than the good, but the higher stages of Buddhist practice are as much concerned with disentanglement from good karma as from bad. Thus, complete action is ultimately free, uncontrived, or spontaneous action, in exactly the same sense as the Taoist Wu Wei. Smriti, recollectedness, and samadhi, contemplation, constitute the section dealing with the life of meditation, the inner mental practice of the Buddha's way. Complete recollectedness is a constant awareness or watching of one's sensations, feelings, and thoughts, without purpose or comment. It is a total clarity and presence of mind, actively passive, wherein events come and go like reflections in a mirror. Nothing is reflected except what is. In walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, he understands that he is so doing, so that, however his body is engaged, he understands it just as it is. In setting out or returning, in looking before or around, in bending or stretching his arm, he acts with clear awareness. Through such awareness, it is seen that the separation of the thinker from the thought, the knower from the known, the subject from the object, is purely abstract. There is not the mind on the one hand, and its experiences on the other. There is just a process of experiencing in which there is nothing to be grasped as an object, and no one as a subject to grasp it. Seen thus, the process of experiencing ceases to clutch at itself. Thought follows thought without interruption. That is, without any need to divide itself from itself, so as to become its own object. Where there is an object, there thought arises. Is then the thought one thing and the object another? No. What is the object? Just that is the thought. If the object were one thing and the thought another, then there would be a double state of thought. So the object itself is just thought. Can then thought review thought? No, thought cannot review thought. As the blade of a sword cannot cut itself, as the fingertip cannot touch itself, so a thought cannot see itself. This non-duality of the mind, in which it is no longer divided against itself, is samadhi, and because of the disappearance of that fruitless threshing around of the mind to grasp itself, samadhi is a state of profound peace. This is not the stillness of total inactivity, for once the mind returns to its natural state, samadhi persists at all times, in walking, standing, sitting, and lying. But from the earliest times, Buddhism has especially emphasized the practice of recollectedness and contemplation while sitting. Most images of the Buddha show him in the posture of sitting meditation, in the particular attitude known as Padmasana, the posture of the lotus, with the legs crossed and the feet resting, soles upward, upon the thighs. Sitting meditation is not, as is often supposed, a spiritual exercise, a practice followed for some ulterior object. From a Buddhist standpoint, it is simply the proper way to sit, and it seems perfectly natural to remain sitting so long as there is nothing else to be done, and so long as one is not consumed with nervous agitation. To the restless temperament of the West, sitting meditation may seem to be an unpleasant discipline, because we do not seem to be able to sit just to sit, without qualms of conscience, without feeling that we ought to be doing something more important to justify our existence. To propitiate this restless conscience, sitting meditation must therefore be regarded as an exercise, a discipline with an ulterior motive. Yet at that very point, it ceases to be a meditation, dhyana, in the Buddhist sense, for where there is purpose, where there is seeking and grasping for results, there is no dhyana. This word, dhyana, Pali jhana, is the original Sanskrit form of the Chinese chan and the Japanese zen, and thus its meaning is of central importance for an understanding of Zen Buddhism. Meditation, in the common sense of thinking things over or musing, is a most misleading translation. But such alternatives as trance or absorption are even worse, since they suggest states of hypnotic fascination. The best solution seems to be to leave dhyana untranslated and add it to the English language as we have added nirvana and Tao. As used in Buddhism, the term dhyana comprises both recollectedness, smriti, and samadhi, and can best be described as the state of unified or one-pointed awareness. On the one hand, it is one-pointed in the sense of being focused on the present, since to clear awareness there is neither past nor future, but just this one moment, ekaksana, which Western mystics have called the eternal now. On the other hand, it is one-pointed in the sense of being a state of consciousness without differentiation of the knower, the knowing, and the known. A Tathagata, that is, a Buddha, is a seer of what is to be seen, but he is not mindful, na manati, or does not conceive of the seen, the unseen, the seeable, or the seer. So too with the heard, the sensed, and the known. He does not think of them in these categories. The difficulty of appreciating what dhyana means is that the structure of our language does not permit us to use a transitive verb without a subject and a predicate. When there is knowing, grammatical convention requires that there must be someone who knows and something which is known. We are so accustomed to this convention in speaking and thinking that we fail to recognize that it is simply a convention, and that it does not necessarily correspond to the actual experience of knowing. Thus, when we say a light flashed, it is somewhat easier to see through the grammatical convention and to realize that the flashing is the light. But dhyana, as the mental state of the liberated or awakened man, is naturally free from the confusion of conventional entities with reality. Our intellectual discomfort in trying to conceive knowing without a distinct someone who knows and a distinct something which is known is like the discomfort of arriving at a formal dinner in pajamas. The error is conventional, not existential. Once again, therefore, we see how convention, how the maya of measurement and description populates the world with those ghosts which we call entities and things. So hypnotic, so persuasive is the power of convention that we begin to feel these ghosts as realities, and make of them our loves, our ideals, our prized possessions. But the anxiety-laden problem of what will happen to me when I die is, after all, like asking what happens to my fist when I open my hand, or where my lap goes when I stand up. Perhaps, then, we are now able to understand the celebrated summary of the Buddha's doctrine given in the Visuddhimagga. Suffering alone exists, none who suffer. The deed there is, but no doer thereof. Nirvana is, but no one seeking it. The path there is, but none who travel it.